Howdy, folks, and welcome to Saddle and Sixskin. If you're anything like me, you appreciate a good story, especially one set against the backdrop of the Old West, when life was tough, and folks had to rely on grit and determination to survive. This is a channel for folks who appreciate the history of the Old West, and I hope you enjoy the content. Stick around as we delve into a tale of hardship, courage, and love that'll remind you of the resilience of the human spirit. And while you're here, why don't you mosey on down and hit that like button? Or better yet, subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. We've got plenty more stories brewing just like this one, tales that'll transport you back to a time when a handshake meant more than any contract and a man's word was his bond. We aim to bring you authentic stories and share the history of the real West. This tale will give you an escape from modern life. So, settle in, grab yourself a cup of coffee, and let's ride. We begin our tale in the Montana Territory. The sound of a gavel striking wood echoed through the dusty square of Silver Creek, Montana Territory, 1876. A stark, unforgiving sound in a harsh, unforgiving place. On a makeshift auction platform stood Grace Winter. Her honey blonde hair, usually her pride, was now matted with dust, and silent tears streamed down her dirt-streaked face, carving clean lines through the grime. Her wrists were bound tightly with coarse rope, the fibers biting into her skin. A painful, physical symbol of how far she had fallen, how drastically her life had changed from the refined existence she once knew in Boston. Gone were the silks, the society gatherings, the comfortable routines of her past. Now, she was chattel, a commodity to be bought and sold. The auctioneer cleared his throat, his voice booming across the square. $500 for this fine specimen, he declared, his tone as cold and impersonal as the Montana wind. Can you imagine finding yourself in that position? What thoughts would be racing through your mind? Have you had a change in your life that set you back? The Old West did not take it easy on anyone. Can I get $500? The auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd of miners, ranchers, and drifters who had gathered for the territorial auction. These were men who'd come to the West seeking fortune, adventure, or a fresh start. Many were rough around the edges, hardened by the challenges of frontier life. They were a mix of opportunity seekers. Look at her, gentlemen, the auctioneer continued, his voice laced with a salesman's pitch. Young, healthy, and educated, too. She'll cook, clean, and maybe warm your bed if you treat her right. A ripple of crude laughter erupted from the crowd, the sound echoing around the square. Grace closed her eyes, unable to bear the leering faces, the appraising stares that stripped her bare. She tried to block out the lewd comments and the callous remarks, but they pierced her defenses like a branding iron, searing into her soul. Do you know what this kind of experience would do to you? Would you find the strength to continue? Why not give that like button another tap? Just 3 weeks ago, Grace had been traveling west with her uncle, her only living relative, to start a new life after the devastating loss of her parents to influenza. They envisioned a new start. They hoped to create a haven where they could rebuild their lives and find solace after their loss. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. Then came the ambush. Ruthless bandits, hardened by the frontier, emerged from the shadows, their eyes gleaming with greed. They killed her uncle without hesitation, leaving Grace utterly alone, stripped of everything she owned, both material and emotional. The bandits didn't care about the loss of her parents. Her uncle meant nothing to them. The bandits stripped her of her identity and her freedom. They sold her to a slave trader, a man who operated in the shadows of the lawless frontier, trading in human misery. The slave trader didn't care that indentured servitude was illegal in most territories. Here, on this remote, isolated patch of land, the law was whatever a man could enforce. Did justice exist in the West? Here, in this lawless frontier town, no one seemed to care about such legal distinctions. 500, do I hear 550? The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip in the afternoon heat, cutting through the oppressive silence. 600. A voice called out, slurred and drunken. Grace forced her eyes open, against her will, to see a pot-bellied man with yellowed teeth and filthy clothes, leering at her. He stood unsteadily, his eyes glazed with cheap whiskey. The very sight of him filled her with disgust and dread, a stark reminder of the fate that awaited her if she remained in this place. She shuddered involuntarily, feeling the weight of hopelessness crushing her. Have you ever had to deal with someone who made you shudder, and what did you do? If you are appreciating this tale, let me remind you to subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin, because there's plenty more content on the way. 700. Came another bid, this one from a silver-haired gentleman, whose cold eyes appraised her like cattle, calculating her worth. There was no kindness in his gaze, only a detached, business-like assessment. His presence added another layer of horror to the scene, a reminder that cruelty could come in many forms, not just from the unwashed masses. 800. Called the drunk again, swaying on his feet. The bidding continued, each number hammering another nail into the coffin of Grace's hopes, each dollar sign representing a piece of her humanity being chipped away. Did they have any consideration for Grace? The value of the item they were bidding on was the only concern to the bidders. In the end, they cared not that they were bidding on a human being. The higher the price climbed, the deeper her despair grew. If you like this story so far, subscribe to Saddle and Sixskin. She had nothing. No money, no family, no friends in this wild, untamed territory. She'd heard stories of what happened to women sold this way. Some became little more than slaves on remote ranches, enduring endless labor and abuse. Others were forced into brothels in mining towns. Their lives were shattered. Their spirits broken. The auctioneer's voice rose in excitement at the unexpected high bid. His eyes darted around the crowd, eager to coax even more money from the assembled men. $1,500, going once. A hush fell over the crowd as they turned to see who had offered such a sum. Who would bid that much? They were curious to see the person who valued this human being at such a high price. Grace followed their gaze, her tear-filled eyes settling on a tall figure at the back of the gathering. Did she dare hope she might get some help? Did Grace wonder if her life was about to change, and if so, would it be for better or worse? What would you do? The man stepped forward, the crowd parting for him like water, clearing a path for his advance. He exuded an air of quiet authority, a presence that commanded respect without uttering a single word. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, concealing his expression, but Grace could see the strong line of his jaw, covered in a few days' worth of stubble. He was a man accustomed to hard work, and time on the trail. The man was not afraid of hard work. She was curious and scared. She did not know if she would get help, or get a fate much worse. Her fear turned to hope as he moved towards the platform. What was he going to do? He wore a simple cotton shirt under a leather vest, the garments worn but clean. His denim pants were well-worn denim pants and boots that had seen many miles, each crease and scuff telling a story of journeys taken and challenges overcome. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the weapon nestled in its holster gleaming in the sunlight. The man looked well armed. To Grace, he looked like a man who was more than capable of dealing with anything that came his way. He exuded an air of quiet confidence. 1,500 going once, the auctioneer called, looking around eagerly for a higher bid. 2,000. Shouted the silver-haired man, his face flushed with anger. His initial interest in Grace had now transformed into a contest of wills. It was a game of wealth. What would you do if someone tried to outbid you? The newcomer's expression didn't change. He simply reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. A small purse to carry his money? Was he prepared to spend even more money on this young lady? Did the auctioneer and other men wonder how much money he had in the purse? 3,000, he said, his voice deep and steady. The crowd gasped. $3,000 was a fortune in the territory. Enough to buy a decent spread of land or a small business. It was a sum that could transform a life. It had the potential to change the futures of many people in that crowd. It was enough to make you the envy of many folks. This price could not be topped. $3,000 going once, going twice. The auctioneer's gavel hovered in the air, his eyes darting hopefully around the crowd. The silver-haired man glared but remained silent. His face was red with frustration and defeat. He knew he had been beaten. The fight was over. Sold to the gentleman in the back. Grace felt her knees weaken. What fate awaited her now? She was still nervous about what her future held. Would this stranger be kinder than the others who had bid on her? She had no idea what he had planned for her. Or had she merely been purchased by a man who could afford to pay more for his cruelties? Maybe she was going to have a life worse than what was expected. The stranger approached the platform, boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each deliberate step. He handed the pouch to the auctioneer, who quickly counted the money with greedy fingers. All here, the auctioneer confirmed, handing Grace's rope to her new owner. The man took the rope but immediately produced a knife from his belt. Grace flinched, drawing back as far as her restraints would allow. Her heart leaped into her throat. A flash of panic coursed through her veins. Was he going to hurt her? Was she about to face a new form of abuse? She did not know what he was going to do. The unknown scared her more. Instead of threatening her, however, he sliced through the bonds on her wrists in one swift motion, freeing her from her physical constraints. He did not hurt her, but did his action set her up for a far worse future? "My name is Finn Callahan," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. His eyes, a striking shade of blue that reminded Grace of the ocean she'd left behind in Boston, met hers directly. "And from this moment on, you'll only know joy." Grace stared at him, uncomprehending. Was this the beginning of something new? He had said a very bold statement and she questioned the truth behind his words. She hoped that he was being honest, but her past experiences told her to be cautious. The man, Finn, gently placed his jacket around her shoulders, a gesture of kindness and protection. "Come with me, miss," he said, louder now for others to hear. "My wagon's this way." Still stunned, Grace followed him through the parting crowd. Some men muttered disapprovingly, resentful of his actions. Others watched with obvious envy. The silver-haired man who had bid against Finn stared at them with open hostility. His look conveyed a desire to harm. What were these people thinking? Did they know what was about to happen or what could happen in the future? Were they mad because they did not come up with the idea? "You can't just free her, Callahan," he called out, his voice laced with bitterness. "That's not how things work here." The man was very upset that he was no longer in control. He was not happy about how things were turning out. Finn turned slowly, his hand resting casually near his holster. "I paid for her fair and square, Harrison. What I do with my property is my business." Finn was firm and would not be changing his decision. He owned her and could do what he wanted with her. The man named Harrison spat on the ground but made no move to stop them. He knew his words were not enough to stand in Finn's way. Finn guided Grace to a wagon hitched to two strong horses at the edge of town. "Get in," he said, helping her up to the seat. "We need to put some distance between us and Silver Creek before nightfall." He wanted to leave as fast as possible so they could get out of range from those men. The further they were from town, the safer they would be. What was their destination? And did they have a plan? Grace found her voice at last. "Why?" she asked, her throat dry and scratchy from crying. "Why did you do that?" She needed to understand the reason behind his actions. His reasons did not make sense, but she desperately wanted them to be true. Finn climbed up beside her and took the reins. "No decent person should be sold like cattle," he said simply. He knew what he was doing was right. This type of thing was wrong in his eyes. He clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward, the wagon wheels creaking beneath them. But the money. $3,000. That's just money, Finn replied, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. I've been saving for years. Was going to buy more land, expand my ranch. He glanced at her. This seemed more important. He gave up his dream so that this one life could be better. Could you sacrifice your dreams to save a stranger? Please consider giving a subscription to Saddle and Sixskin. We are working to bring you even more content that will keep you engaged. What do you want from me? Grace asked, still suspicious despite his kind words. Men didn't spend fortunes on women without expecting something in return. Finn was clearly trying to do good, but she had a hard time believing in his sincerity. The world and experiences had shown her how terrible men could be, and it was hard for her to trust him. Nothing, he said. Once we're far enough from town, you can decide where you want to go. I'll help you get there safely. He was not looking to take advantage of her. He just wanted to give her a chance to start over and have a better life. Finn was a man of good character, even if the world had dealt him many blows. Grace stared at his profile as he guided the horses onto the main trail heading west. His features were weathered by sun and wind, but he couldn't be much past 30. There were fine lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though his expression now was serious. Even though they just met, Grace was becoming more comfortable with Finn. What would happen? I have nowhere to go, she admitted quietly. My uncle and I were traveling to Oregon when we were attacked. He was killed. I have no other family. She shared her recent tragedy with him, letting him understand what she was going through. Now they both knew what it was like to experience loss. Finn nodded slowly. I'm sorry to hear that. What's your name, Grace? Grace Winters. Well, Miss Winters, I have a small ranch about a day's ride from here. What was his plan for Grace? Where was the ranch? You're welcome to stay there until you figure out what you want to do next. I have a cabin for hired hands that's empty right now. You'd have your privacy. The offer was far more generous than she could have expected. What was the catch? Or could Finn be just a good person looking to help someone in need? Grace studied him, trying to determine if there was any hint of deception in his offer. She found none, only a straightforward kindness that seemed almost out of place in this harsh territory. Had he been different, this would have been a setup for something far worse. Thank you, Mr. Callahan, she finally said. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Finn, he corrected. And there's no debt. I did what any decent person would do. He did not want to be thanked or recognized. He knew it was right. As the wagon rolled away from Silver Creek, Grace felt something she hadn't experienced since the ambush that had claimed her uncle's life. A small flicker of hope. I would appreciate it if you would like Saddle and Sixskin. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in weeks, she wasn't facing it with complete despair. She could not fully put down her guard, but she could let a little sunshine in. The rest of the day passed in relative silence as Finn guided the wagon along the trail. Occasionally, he would point out landmarks or name distant mountains. It seemed like they both were nervous about speaking so soon. Grace found his voice soothing, the casual conversation helping to ease her anxiety. Hopefully, this trip would mean she was moving towards a better future. As dusk approached, he pulled the wagon off the main trail. We'll camp here for the night, he said, stopping near a small stream. There's good water and enough shelter from the wind. What would they have to eat? And where would they sleep? Grace watched as Finn efficiently set up camp, unloading bedrolls, and starting a small fire. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to life on the trail. This was not his first time. Are you hungry? He asked, rummaging in a provision box in the back of the wagon. Grace nodded, suddenly aware of the hollow feeling in her stomach. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a proper meal. Finn produced some dried beef, beans, and a small sack of cornmeal. "It's not fancy, but it'll fill your belly," he said, beginning to prepare a simple stew. Simple, but enough to keep her going. "We hope you are enjoying this tale. Can I help?" Grace asked, stepping closer to the fire. Finn looked up, seeming surprised by the offer. "Sure, you can cut up these potatoes if you'd like." Finn handed Grace a paring knife and a few potatoes and started to stir the beans. Grace took the knife he offered and began to work, grateful for the task. The simple act of preparing food made her feel human again after weeks of being treated like property. Now, it was about giving the other person respect. "Were you really planning to buy land with that money?" she asked after a while. Finn nodded, stirring the pot of beans. "Been saving for 5 years. My place is small, just enough for me, and a few dozen head of cattle. Always wanted to expand," he shrugged. "Land will still be there next year, or the year after." To her, the land was not that important. "I can't imagine having that much money, let alone giving it away," Grace said quietly. "Money is just a tool, Miss Winters. Sometimes there are more important things." He looked up at her like, human dignity. He valued her life more than his desires. Grace felt a lump form in her throat. "My uncle used to say something similar. He was a good man." Finn agreed. "How'd you end up out here? You don't talk like you're from the territories." This meant there was more to her past than what was revealed. "I'm from Boston," Grace explained, passing him the cut potatoes. "My parents died last winter, influenza. Uncle William was my only family. He'd been writing to us about opportunities in Oregon, so I decided to join him." The pain of her loss could be seen on her face. She lost everything back east and was looking to restart. She swallowed hard. "We were 3 weeks into our journey when the bandits came." Finn added the potatoes to the pot. "The territories can be dangerous, too many men who have forgotten what civilization means." He hesitated. "Those men who took you, did they?" "They didn't harm me that way," Grace said quickly, understanding his unspoken question. This was her way of letting him know that she was intact. "They seemed to think they'd get more money if they sold me, intact." Relief crossed Finn's features. "Small mercies, I suppose." He stirred the stew again. "This will be ready soon. There's coffee, too, if you'd like some." They ate in comfortable silence as darkness settled around them. The stew was simple, but the most delicious thing Grace had tasted in weeks. After they'd finished, Finn showed her where she could wash up at the stream. This was their day ending. Would they finally be safe for the night? "I'll sleep on this side of the fire," he said when she returned, indicating one of the bed rolls he'd set up. "You take the other. It's a clear night, but if it looks like rain, we'll string up the canvas." This was his way of respecting her privacy. Grace settled onto the bed roll, pulling the blanket up to her chin. She watched as Finn checked on the horses one last time before adding wood to the fire. "Mr. Callahan," Grace turned to look at him. "You kept my safe and treated me with respect." "Thank you." "Finn," she corrected herself. "Thank you, not just for buying my freedom, but for treating me like a person." Finn looked at her across the flickering flames. "Get some rest, Miss Winters. We've got a long ride tomorrow." His words of kindness helped ease the burden. Grace closed her eyes, listening to the crackling fire and the soft sounds of the night. "We hope you are enjoying this tale. Maybe you should think of becoming a subscriber to Saddle and Sixskin." For the first time in weeks, she fell asleep without fear. She finally was able to put some faith in another human being. Morning came with the chirping of birds and the gentle rustling of leaves. Grace opened her eyes to find Finn already up, tending to a small fire with coffee brewing. "Good morning," he said, noticing she was awake. "Sleep well?" Grace sat up, pushing her tangled hair from her face. "Better than I have in a long time," she admitted. Last night gave her a true reset after all of her hardship. There's coffee ready and some biscuits from yesterday. He handed her a tin cup of the steaming liquid. We should reach my place by nightfall if we make good time. Grace accepted the cup gratefully, wrapping her hands around its warmth. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. As she drank, Grace started to feel at ease again. "What's your ranch like?" she asked, curious about the place that would be her temporary home. Finn's face softened slightly. "Nothing fancy. Main house is small but solid. Got a barn corral and the bunkhouse where you'll stay. Land's good though, creek running through it. Plenty of grass for the cattle." There was pride in his voice when he added, "Built most of it myself over the last 7 years." You could hear him swell with pride. "You've been in Montana territory that long?" He was not a stranger to these lands. "Came west after the war," he said, packing up their bedrolls. "Didn't have much reason to stay in Missouri. Wanted to start fresh somewhere new." Grace helped him break camp, and soon, they were back on the trail. The terrain gradually changed as they traveled, the flat plains giving way to rolling hills dotted with pine trees. They passed through the beautiful scenery of the west. In the distance, mountains rose against the blue sky. What could lay in store for the pair? "It's beautiful," Grace said, taking in the landscape. Grace found peace in this land and hoped she could start something new. "That it is," Finn agreed. "First time I saw these hills, I knew I'd found home." For Finn, this was his sanctuary. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack. Grace found herself watching Finn as he checked the horses' hooves and adjusted their harnesses. His care for the animals caught her attention. There was something comforting about his methodical movements, the quiet competence with which he handled everything. "Were you in the army during the war?" she asked as they continued their journey. Finn nodded. "Union cavalry enlisted in '62, fought till. My father supported the Union cause," Grace said. "He was too old to fight, but he contributed money and supplies." Grace wanted to let Finn know that her family had supported the right side. "It was a hard time," Finn said simply, and Grace sensed he didn't want to say more about it. As the afternoon wore on, Grace noticed Finn becoming more alert, his eyes scanning the surrounding landscape more frequently. Why was he so nervous? "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Just being cautious," he replied. "We're getting close to disputed territory. Some tribes still claim this land, and they will protect it with force." Indians, Grace couldn't keep the alarm from her voice. There were the tribes that would be protective of the lands. Blackfoot mostly. They generally leave settlers alone these days, but it pays to be watchful. He patted the rifle secured beside him. "Don't worry, Miss Winters. We'll be fine." They would be prepared. Despite his reassurance, Grace felt tension creeping into her shoulders. She'd heard stories about Indian attacks back east, though she'd always suspected they were exaggerated to sell newspapers. Were the Indians friendly or more dangerous? "Have you had trouble with them before?" she asked. "Not in a few years," Finn said. "There's an uneasy peace now. They stay north of Miller's Creek. Ranchers stay south." He glanced at her. "The real trouble comes from men like Harrison back in Silver Creek. They're the ones pushing for more land, stirring up conflicts." These were his neighbors that would be aggressive. They traveled on, the shadows lengthening as the sun began its descent. Just as Grace was beginning to wonder how much farther they had to go. The trip was starting to wear on her. Finn pointed to a distant valley. "There it is," he said. "Callahan Ranch." Grace looked to the distance. From this distance, Grace could make out a small cluster of buildings nestled among trees near a winding creek. It was a far way off, but they were getting closer. As they drew closer, the details became clearer. A modest log house with a stone chimney, a large barn, and several smaller outbuildings. A corral held a few horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed on the hillsides. "It's lovely," Grace said sincerely. After weeks of uncertainty, the sight of the peaceful homestead brought unexpected emotion to her throat. Seeing it made her see that Finn was sincere. Finn's expression softened with pride. "It's not much compared to what you probably knew in Boston, but it's home." What did Finn have planned for her? They followed a well-worn track down into the valley. As they approached, a dog came bounding out to meet them, barking excitedly. Here came the friend. "That's Scout," Finn said as the black and white border collie raced alongside the wagon. "Best cattle dog in the territory." A moment later, a man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the setting sun. Finally, they were approaching their destination. "That's Gabriel Martinez," Finn explained. "He helps me run the place." Here comes a helper to Finn. Gabriel was shorter than Finn but solidly built with dark hair and a thick mustache. He watched their approach with evident curiosity. "Didn't expect you back so soon, boss," he called as the wagon came to a stop in front of the house. He was surprised by their early return. His eyes moved to Grace, questions clear in his expression. "Had a change of plans," Finn said, jumping down from the wagon. He turned to help Grace down. "Gabriel, this is Miss Grace Winters. She'll be staying in the bunkhouse for a while." He introduced the pair to one another. Gabriel touched the brim of his hat. "Madam," he said politely, though his eyes darted between her and Finn with obvious confusion. "Miss Winters ran into some trouble on her way west," Finn explained, his tone suggesting Gabriel shouldn't ask for details. "What had happened to her?" "I offered her a place to stay until she decides her next move. There would be new beginnings here for her." Understanding dawned in Gabriel's eyes. "The bunkhouse is clean," he said to Grace. "Not fancy, but it's comfortable enough." "Thank you," Grace replied. "I'm grateful for the shelter." "All thanks to Finn." "Gabriel, can you see to the horses?" Finn asked. "I'll show Miss Winters to the bunkhouse." As Gabriel led the team away, Finn collected Grace's small bundle of belongings, just a worn carpet bag containing the few items the bandits had allowed her to keep. Here was everything she owned. "This way," he said, leading her toward a small cabin about 50 yards from the main house. Like Gabriel said, it's simple, but it's clean and dry. This was the start of their new friendship. The bunkhouse was indeed basic. A single room with 4 narrow beds, a small table with chairs, and a pot-bellied stove in the corner. This was far from luxury, but it was a safe haven. The wood was rough-hewn, but the floor was swept clean, and the windows had proper glass panes. "No one's using it now," Finn explained. "I usually only hire extra hands during roundup and branding season." Grace set her bag on one of the beds. This was her temporary sanctuary. After weeks of captivity and sleeping on the ground, the simple cabin seemed like luxury. It was more than she expected. "There's a wash house behind the main house," Finn continued. "And you're welcome to take your meals with us. Gabriel's a fair cook, though he'll deny it if you mention it." His lips quirked in a small smile. "I can cook," Grace offered. "It's the least I can do to repay your kindness." She would become very helpful. Finn studied her for a moment. "You don't owe me anything, Miss Winters, but if you want to help out, I won't stop you." He glanced out the window at the setting sun. "Supper's usually around sundown. I'll come get you when it's ready." What was this dinner going to be like? After he left, Grace sat on the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden turn her fortunes had taken. The changes that came about were far greater than she expected. Just yesterday, she had been standing on an auction block, facing a future of servitude, or worse. She reflected on what she had been going through. Now she was safe, at least for the moment, in this peaceful valley with a man who had spent his life savings to rescue a stranger. Maybe there was good in the world. She unpacked her meager belongings, a change of clothes, a hairbrush, a small Bible that had belonged to her mother, and a daguerreotype of her parents on their wedding day. All she owned in the world. Everything else had been taken by the bandits. When Finn returned to escort her to supper, Grace had washed her face and hands at the small basin provided and done her best to make herself presentable. She needed to look her best. "I'm afraid I don't have much in the way of clothing," she apologized, smoothing down her wrinkled dress. "There's a trading post about 10 miles from here," Finn said. "We can ride over tomorrow if you'd like. Get you whatever you need." Finn continued to provide the help and support she desperately needed. The main house was simply furnished but comfortable with solid wooden furniture and a large stone fireplace. There were not many amenities, but it was a home. The main room served as both kitchen and dining area with a couple of doors leading to what Grace assumed were bedrooms. It was not large, but it was adequate. Gabriel was setting a pot of stew on the table when they entered. The smell of the stew was intoxicating. He nodded politely to Grace but seemed unsure how to interact with her. He was uncertain how to deal with her. "Smells good," Finn commented, pulling out a chair for Grace. This was Finn's way of trying to keep them all comfortable. The meal was simple but hearty: venison stew, cornbread, and coffee. They had just the necessities. The men ate with the focused efficiency of those who viewed food primarily as fuel, but they answered Grace's tentative questions about the ranch and the surrounding area. The men were eager to make Grace feel welcome. "Been a good year so far," Gabriel told her. "Calving went well, and the grass is better than last summer. We run about 60 head of cattle," Finn added. "Small operation compared to some, but the quality is good. We've been building up the herd each year." There was a sense of pride in Finn. As they ate, Grace studied the two men. She learned a lot about these men by observing. Gabriel was clearly deferential to Finn, but there was an ease between them that spoke of long acquaintance and mutual respect. What was their background? They moved around each other with the comfortable familiarity of men who had worked together for years. After supper, Gabriel excused himself to check on a new calf born the previous day. It was important to care for the animals. Finn poured another cup of coffee and sat back in his chair. "Tomorrow, I'll show you around the place," he said. "Let you get your bearings." There was still a lot to show her. "I'd like that," Grace replied. "And I meant what I said about helping. I'm not afraid of work." She wanted to earn her keep. Finn nodded slowly. "I believe that, but take a few days to rest first. You've been through a lot." Grace wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "May I ask you something?" She needed to let him know about her curiosity. "Of course. Why did you really do it?" "Buy my freedom. I mean, $3,000 is it's a fortune." This was important for her to know. Finn was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on some middle distance. He thought about his past before answering. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I had a sister, Fiona. She was 2 years younger than me." Grace saw a sudden change come over Finn. "When I went off to war, she stayed behind with our parents in Missouri." He took a breath. "In '63, raiders came through our town. Bushwhackers, they called themselves, fighting for the Confederacy, they said, but they were just thieves and murderers." Grace sat very still, sensing the weight of what he was about to tell her. What would this story reveal about Finn? "They killed my father when he tried to protect our farm. Took my mother and Fiona," his jaw tightened. "By the time word reached me and I got leave to go home, it was too late. Found my mother's body in a ditch outside of town. I never found Fiona." The pain in his voice made her want to comfort him. "I'm so sorry," Grace whispered. "He must be in so much pain to talk about this." Later, I heard stories about women being sold to brothels or to men in remote places who wanted wives but couldn't find willing ones. Did this story help him? He finally looked at her directly. When I saw you on that platform, I couldn't walk away. Not again. Grace felt tears well in her eyes. I hope the story helped. Thank you for telling me. She was glad he let her know. Finn cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with having revealed so much. Did he regret sharing the story? It's getting late. I should let you get some rest. He walked her back to the bunkhouse, carrying a lantern to light their way. He was still protecting her. At the door, he handed her the light. If you need anything in the night, the main house is right there. Don't hesitate to come knock. Finn was always offering his support. Thank you, Finn, for everything. He nodded once, then turned and walked back toward the house, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness. He was very respectful. Grace closed the door and prepared for bed, her mind spinning with all that had happened. Her mind was working with all the new information. As she lay in the narrow but comfortable bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Montana night, she thought about Finn Callahan and the tragedy that had shaped him. Could there be something more between them? Perhaps that explained the sadness she sometimes glimpsed behind his eyes, the careful way he kept people at a distance. Would Finn open up to her? Sleep came easier than she expected, deep and dreamless in the safety of her new sanctuary. Grace finally had a feeling of peace. The following days established a routine that Grace found comforting after the chaos and uncertainty of recent weeks. Now came a new routine. True to his word, Finn took her to the trading post, where he insisted.